Hello, I'm Pat Craven and I'm interviewing Rachel Williams about the mechanics of an assault. Rachel has survived attempted murder and the suicide of her teenage son. She's written about her ordeal in her best-selling book, The Devil at Home, which is available from Amazon. I'll put a link up to that book so you can see it after we finish this interview. She's a Freedom Programme trainer and provides the programme free to dozens of women every week. This is Lynn, who also is a Freedom Programme trainer and facilitator, and has kindly agreed to use her video skills and her director skills to try and make sense of this interview. Hi, Lynn.
Hi, everyone.
Lynn, could we please have a look at the graphic for rules of the game, please? Just to remind ourselves of how it all works. So there we are. Now we've got rules of the game. The top box are the expectations of the dominator. And the next box is how he uses the abusive behaviour of the dominator to keep them in place. Sooner or later, though, we women break a rule or two because we either don't know what they are or we break them on purpose. At this point, his beliefs about women come under threat and he experiences feelings of panic, powerlessness and outrage. And at this point, he makes a cold-hearted decision to use violence. To justify it to himself before he does it, he gives himself the excuses in advance. He calls us lots of names, he winds himself up, we call it the wind-up stage. And when he's good and ready, and this can take minutes, hours or days, he will use violence. And then if we're still alive and we survive the experience, he then tries to put the rules back in place by making excuses, promises to change, etc., etc. So Rachel, let's have a go with you now, please. Can you give us some examples of the hundreds of rules that your abuser expected you to obey?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. So as you said, there were many hundreds of rules. So for instance, I couldn't cut a man's hair. Being a hairdresser, this really impacted my work. I couldn't fulfill my role as the hairdresser. I couldn't dye my hair. I couldn't go out socialising with friends. I couldn't wear certain clothes, e.g. short skirts. I had to obey his instructions to the letter. I had to guess when he changed the rules. I was never allowed to answer back. Always accept his excuses for violence, and under no uncertain terms was I allowed to leave him.
Fine, good. Now, Rachel, how did he ensure that you obeyed all these rules?
So he exercised a reign of terror, which lasted for 18 years, Pat. He intimidated me, the children, all my relatives, and even the police. He also assaulted me frequently. His favourite was to spit in my face, and he liked to ram his nose into my face, almost pecking me. And also non-fatal strangulation was something that happened regularly.
Notice, Rachel, this is actually becoming law. It's now going into statute books, isn't it, as part of the law. Well done, and well done with all your campaigning there. Okay, well, how does you use to break the rules, Rachel?
So I used tiny acts of rebellion, like putting hot mustard in his food, particularly in stacks of pancakes, because I was his cook. And one time I also let all his abused dogs go free. This used to make me feel a little less of his slave. However, my most significant rule break was to press charges after, especially when there was a brutal assault on me when he strangled me and he slit his wrist in front of our son Jack, and that was when I thought, I can't take no more. And I refused to have him back when he used all these tactics of persuasion. So I actually broke 2 of these rules by leaving him and not having him back.
These are a very significant rule break, and it was very dangerous for you to do this. So at that point, he decided to use violence again, this time as your final punishment for breaking these rules. But he wound himself up first, as we said on the graphic. How did he do that, Rachel, to prepare for this act of violence?
So now looking back and speaking to friends and family, he visited friends and family making verbal threats. He also played the victim by taking an overdose, which was clearly not enough to kill him. He called me all the names he needed to use to convince himself that I deserved to die and that he had no choice but to kill me. And this lasted for what I know several days. I was a slag, a slut, a whore, a crap mother, you name it. He even told a good friend of mine that I used to slag her off constantly, clearly to get her to agree with him.
God. Well, it didn't work, did it? So what happened next, Rachel, when he decided to enact his final assault?
So on the 19th of August 2011, I believe this was the day after, he really wound himself up like a spinning top and visited friends of ours and set the ball in motion in his head that he was going to fulfill what he thought was going to be his last final act of power. He came into my place of work armed with a sawn-off shotgun, and there was a battle in the salon which resulted in him shooting me. The first blast, my left leg took. The second blast skimmed past my ear. He put the gun down to reload. I managed to grab the sawn-off, at which point I had some sort of supernatural strength from the adrenaline, I suppose. He couldn't get the gun off me, so he absolutely pummeled me. I can remember being kicked under the chin. He stamped all over my head. And then he left the salon, and I was later told that he committed suicide. And yeah, so that was his sort of final act on myself.
It's tragic. You finally recovered and became a leading light in the campaign against abusive men and violence against women. There was a terrible other casualty of this, wasn't there? Because your poor son was so confused by the treatment that he'd received from his father over the years that he also died, didn't he, Rachel?
Yeah, so I was in hospital for 6 weeks recovering from the assault and the gunshot. And sadly, I came out of hospital on the 23rd of September 2011, and my 16-year-old son Jack took his life on the Monday, the 26th. And I think it's really important to stress the effects of domestic abuse, not only on us as survivors, but also on the children. And I think the Freedom Programme really shows you the importance.
Rachel seems to have faded, but I think we've got the brilliant message across. Lynn, thank you. Rachel, thank you. So we'll finish this now, and we'll see you all again on future videos.